First of all, I guess the best place to start is, can you tell us about the first time that you met Rick Nelson? And obviously, you had been aware of him from the time on the television series and such. Were you with him on I'm Walking?
No, he had recorded that for another label, and what had happened at that time was that Ozzie, who was guiding Rick quite a bit, and Rick was glad to have that happen because he was only interested in music. Ozzie was not happy with what was happening with that record label, and he asked some friends of his to look around, and Jack Mass specifically, and Jack approached Lou Chudd of Imperial Records, and I had just joined Imperial Records at that time, and I was doing lead sheets, that is takedowns, menial tasks for arrangers, but I knew I was an arranger and I wanted to get up there the best way I could, and at the same time I was producing local groups for Imperial Records, and Ozzie and Rick came, and Lou Chudd came to an agreement regarding Rick recording, and then Lou said to me, "Why don't you produce Ricky Nelson?" I said, "What does that mean?" And he said, "Just go in the studio and do like you always do and make hit records." And I said, "Oh, okay." I didn't know that there was more stature to it than I thought at the time. After all, I was on salary to the company. And when I met Ricky, he came up to the office, and Lou said he wants to buy an Elvis Presley record, and he said there's only one place in town where it can be bought. And so Lou sent me down to the distributor with Rick, and the first thing Ricky did in my car is find the country station and play it. So that's when I became aware that he was really interested in country music, and I thought he was a very nice young boy. After all, he was quite young at that time, and he got the record, and he was pleased with it. It was a Sun label. And little by little, we began rehearsing in his bungalow because he was required to be on the set, or available on the set. And little by little, we'd go through songs, and I would select songs for him, and he would gradually have various people submitting songs to him. But the first record that he chose was Bebop Baby by a fellow who'd made a demo named, I believe his name was Dick Glasser. And he did that on one side, and he wanted to cover an Elvis Presley tune on the other side, which was Have I Told You Lately That I Love You. And because the Jordanaires were on that, he says, "Well, how do we get him?" And I said, "Well, we'll locate him, and I guess, can we afford to fly him out here?" And I was told, yes, just keep the cost down, and we can do that. So we flew the Jordanaires out here, and they did the backgrounds on it, and that started a relationship that lasted right up to the end. I'm sure you've interviewed the Jordanaires.
I'm going to be talking to Gordon Stoker next Monday evening, as a matter of fact.
He's a lovely person, and I hope that you talk to Ray also, who is quite an eloquent speaker and a lovely man.
Okay.
Gordon is the leader of the group, and he was there from the very beginning, but so was Ray, and Ray is essentially thought of as a kind of the quiet bass voice, but I found that I like his bit of humor when he talks, and you would probably enjoy him too.
I'm going to see if I can get him on. Now, in the early days, I noticed from just looking at my Imperial albums, there was really not a producer on the
record. There wasn't. When the first record came out, Ozzie, and the label copy was about to be done, Ozzie said to me, "Jimmie, we're building Ricky's career, and we want the people to think or imply that Ricky produced his own records. And so therefore, when the album comes out, we will mention your name on the back of it, usually as arranger." Well, since I had made whatever money I had made up to that early point in my life, either as a player or as an arranger. And because I didn't really know the meaning of the word producer, because I had never received any monies as a producer, and even when I produced Ricky, Lou Chudd was who kept a tight budget, never suggested that I was to receive money as producer. And so I didn't know I was supposed to. And I kept thinking of myself as an arranger who just happened to be given the job of sitting in the booth and getting the sound. And of course I knew what I wanted. Mainly what I did is, Ricky, you might say, was partly producer or co-producer, because we would play things and he would approve. He would give final approval. And so I very quickly learned what he liked. And of course my ear or my head was into the same sounds his was. And I very quickly learned the particular gradations of sound that he liked, and I would make sure that that's what we got in the booth every time he recorded.
Jimmie, one of the things that I've noticed on especially things like Traveling Man, Hello Mary Lou, and so many of the early Imperial stuff is a real distinct sound in the percussion area and the rhythm areas of the records.
One of the things that we did, which I really loved, and which you hardly hear anymore, was a very tight rhythm section. We would do takes over and over again until we were all satisfied, and we never thought that there was any other way to do it. The band itself was quite good. Richie Frost on drums. In the very first bass player he had was a kid whose last name was West. I forget his first name. Played stand-up bass, and then shortly after that we went with Joe Osborne, who continued to be the bass player after that, and James Burton on lead guitar.
Mm-hmm.
Now on rhythm guitar we had some kid named Glenn Campbell. Ricky wanted to play rhythm guitar, and he played it very well. So I'd say in the beginning, Ricky played his own rhythm guitar, but more and more, as he wanted to hear the sessions and hear what was going on, then Glenn started playing rhythm guitar. If I remember correctly, Ricky did play rhythm guitar on the first couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Glenn wasn't even in town. To get back to your statement about the percussion, I made sure that the hits on the snare drum and the sounds on the rhythm guitar both hit together and sounded like they were one instrument. In other words, the rhythm guitar was triggering, as we would use today's vernacular, the drums, or the drums were triggering the acoustic guitar, but we didn't have that, any electronic triggering in those days, so we did it live and together. And then in my balancing, I would see to it that the piano, which frequently had little percussive sounds, and we would get even more percussive sounds. 3K was our favorite equalization. That's 3,000 in those days cycles, which later changed to the name Hertz, which is being used today. That adds a certain edge to the sound, so we'd add that to the overall record when we were through, which tended to brighten everything, including James Burton's guitar and including Rick's voice. Just a little bit of a touch. It gave it just that little slight percussive edge. I was very pleased with it, and Rick was pleased with it. Obviously, the public was pleased with it, because they bought it.
That seemed to be almost the Rick Nelson sound, in terms of it didn't seem that too many other people were taking that exact approach to it. It seemed to be a very distinctive sound for Rick.
I would say that was a combination of Ricky and myself, because he chose the songs and the demos that he liked best, and then I would arrange them and talk it over with the boys before he'd show up, and then by the time he'd show up, he would fine-tune it by saying, well, let's take it just a little bit slower, a little faster, or a lot of times he would just say, that's fine, Jimmy, let's go make a take.
What did you think of Rick's musical savvy as far as...
completely unrecognized at that time, and I, who was simply trying to do my job in the beginning, came to be aware of how great Rick's taste was. Now, if you speak of savvy from a technical standpoint, Rick didn't know much about technicalities, but he knew what he liked. And his sense of taste was just superb. I would say that his whole style was set by his own head. As a producer, A&R man, I can't take credit for the songs that he finally chose. I can only say that I weeded out of the 200 to 300 songs that were submitted to us each week. I weeded out all but, in some cases, 35, in some cases 20, and then brought them over to Ricky because I knew the ones that he definitely wouldn't want. And then I brought them over to him, and he would narrow those down to 1 or 2 or 3 that he really liked, and then we would try to record them.
Now, after Rick moved from Imperial to Decca, there seemed to be somewhat of a subtle change in the music from a rock and roll rockabilly type to more of a sort of an easy listening, a middle of the road. Now, was this due to the wishes of Decca, or was it the era in which rock and roll became tamer? Or
I think it was partly the era in which rock and roll became tamer, and partly the fact that Rick by then had become an important star to the publishers, in that they knew that if they could get a Ricky Nelson record, they would have a hit. So every once in a while, a song would come along that Decca felt they could do a hit record with, and while Bud Dant was essentially the producer, Rick kept me on as arranger and, you might say, advisor to Bud to continue to get our sound. And of course, most of those early years, we had, I left out a very important ingredient. Bunny Robine, R-O-B-Y-N, was our engineer. And he helped us get that sound in the beginning, too. Of course, Rick worked with several famous engineers, which we can get back to again, famous historically, not necessarily public today. But, for instance, when Young Love came along, Rick, by the way, did not like strings, but every once in a while when a song came for strings, I'd write them. And just jumping around now, when he did Rudy the Fifth, after many years, he decided that he needed one cut with strings, so he brought me in to write the strings. It was a little bit the times, a little bit some ballads, softer things that were kind of forced on him. And Ozzie, of course, who liked all kinds of music and who used to have a band, and whose wife, Harriet, Rick's mother, used to be the band vocalist, enjoyed all kinds of music. And while Ozzie was a driving force in the beginning, he was the one who said, let's have louder bass and louder drums than we would normally have, because when we play them on the television show, they tend to disappear. And so we want to retain the balance. Well, in a sense, you might say Ozzie's suggestion created the balance that we kept in the Ricky Nelson records, which later on was picked up by a lot of other producers who produced both country and rock and roll, because prior to that, the bass and drums were not that loud.
You bring up an important character in Rick's life, and as of yet, I haven't been able to address him sufficiently, but will when I talk to David and some other people, and I think that you'll have some good insight. It's told that Ozzie was the man that first suggested playing I'm Walking, or got Rick the 20-year contract to Decca Records. And it seems to be, in talking to you and learning the stories, that Ozzie had a great business sense and a great deal of musical taste, if you will, or knowledge that really was a guiding factor in Rick's career. Is this true?
Yes, to everything you just said. That is all true. Ozzie was extremely important, and I would say that for the first 6 months for sure, and then spasmodically during the rest of the 6 months of the first year, Ozzie was in the booth. I mean, looking back now, and it suddenly occurred to me as I talked to you, I never thought about it before, but Ozzie would stay with us until 2 or 3 in the morning, but he had to get up at 6 every morning in order to start writing his show and then he had to be on the set a couple hours after that to start directing his show. So he stayed with Rick, and he had Rick and Ozzie both had a great amount of energy. Ricky was the first artist, I believe the first artist in the world, to start recording at 8 or 9 p.m. and continue until he was satisfied with the takes at 7 or 8 a.m. the next morning.
Now, you worked with Rick, obviously, when he was about, I guess, 16, 17.
I believe he was just about to turn 17 when I first met him.
And
I seem to recall his age as being 17. You'd be able to look that up historically.
yeah, we all know that 16 and 17-year-olds can be at times uncooperative or a little...
Rick was perhaps because of his upbringing with Ozzie and Harriet. Ozzie was a marvelous father, as far as I can tell. I didn't live with the family, but I recall one instance when Rick came up to Ozzie. I was working with him in the bungalow, and then Rick had to ask his father a question. And he said, Dad, I've got to... He went over to the set. His father was directing. He says, Dad, I've got to talk to you about something. And Ozzie said, would we be able to talk it over at dinner time? And Ricky said, sure, Dad. And he said, let's do it then, son. You know, and I enjoyed that little repartee between the two of them, because most teenagers would have interrupted their father no matter what they were doing. They would not have accepted a statement to delay whatever it was that was required. Ricky had a great deal of patience. That was exhibited in the recordings. You see, in those days, they were really unaware of the benefits of editing. So we would just do entire takes. And finally, one day, we had gone so many hours, and Bunny, the engineer, and I both knew that we had the front end that was perfect on one take and the back end that was perfect on another take. We said, why don't we balance it? And Ozzie said, well, why don't we edit it, excuse me. And Ozzie said, well, I don't know about that. And meanwhile, Bunny, very quietly, was working with his pair of scissors, believe it or not, in those days, instead of razor blade and editing block. And since Ozzie didn't quite know what he was doing, what Bunny was doing, I mean, Ozzie always knew what Ozzie was doing. Bunny, very quietly, while Ozzie and I were discussing the relative merits of editing the tune, he edited it, put it together, and said, would you like to hear it? And Ozzie says, you mean it's just been edited? And he said, yes. So Bunny played it for us, and Ozzie says, well, that's just great. And this was like at 4 a.m. on a night that we were working. I don't remember the particular tune, but after that, we could then go for half of one take and half of another. But even then, Ricky wanted to get the take as perfect as possible, and he had great patience. That's what I wanted to indicate by this.
You touched on something that I want to pursue just a little bit. When Rick started out, obviously there has been a lot of change in the recording industry and in the way records are made, both technically and structurally, and I mean that from the sense of who runs these record companies and such. Having had a long-standing experience with Rick throughout the years, how did he view these changes? Did he like these changes, or did that sort of...
I don't think Rick paid attention to the changes. Ricky did what Ricky felt. And I think you will find through the years that when other people were making changes, that he kept pretty much his own style until, of course, after he had left Imperial and after he had left Decca. Then I didn't have discussions with him, but later on when, as you know, Ricky called me up after I hadn't worked with him for quite a while. He called me up almost, it was 2 years ago, 2 years ago this time, and said, Jimmie, I want to start making records with the sound like we used to get. You think we can do that? And I said, sure. So we did one record together, and he said, how'd you get that sound? I said, the way we used to. Evidently, by that point, 2 years ago from of today, he had so many different producers and so many different styles that Ricky, not being the, let's say, the analytical arranger and analytical producer, which arrangers and producers should all be, and unfortunately they're not all, but I consider myself to be analytical enough so that I can capture or recapture any sound. But while we were sitting around and recording the new album, which, by the way, is just wonderful. It hasn't been completed. I don't know when it will be completed. By completed, I mean we have to finish putting lead guitars on. James Burton has shown a willingness to do that. We have to really reach for Ricky's rough vocals, which he did while we were doing the band, and in listening to them, they are so good that it proves the professionality of Ricky, or Rick, in his singing, because he didn't intend those to be final vocals, and yet they were good enough to be final vocals. Getting back to different styles, we were sitting around, and at one point we learned, as we were working on the new album, that somebody was going to release something he had done with Al Cooper. And Rick said, the only comment I ever heard, he said, it was different than anything I had ever done, but I liked it. So since Ricky and I did not discuss the philosophy of music frequently, hardly ever, that one comment is the only thing I can give to you in answer to your question, that if he felt that a new form of music was something that was good, he was willing to try it.
Okay. An important question. Rick is often credited with making rock and roll back again in the 50s at the time of Elvis and Jerry Lee Lewis and the raw rock and roll. He's often credited with making rock and roll acceptable to the parents.
Oh, yes. That was immediately noticeable to me in that when I first began producing Ricky, people would say, you work in this new rock and roll music? And I said, yes, I do. And they said, well, would I know any of the names you're working with? I said, well, I'm working with Ricky Nelson right now. Oh, is he considered to be rock and roll? He's all right, and he's enjoyable. I said, we like to feel that we choose songs with taste and that Ricky sings them with taste. So it was a little bit strange to the parents in that while they knew he was a rock and roll idol, they liked his music, and there again, it was because we recorded it with taste. James Burton's guitar licks were very musical as opposed to what came out later to be heavy metal several years afterwards. And even in those days, though, there were people that were playing, that were making tasteless records, that were making out-of-tune records. And while the general public may or may not recognize out-of-tuneness, they can feel uncomfortable with out-of-tuneness. Mm-hmm. And so we had our records exactly in tune. We had great taste in the musicality of the records. Ricky himself had a very pleasant voice, and most people, by the way, are not aware of the fact that he had an enormous range. They used to think this was the actor who could just barely sing. I don't know who started that. Must have been some jealous people. What probably started the little rumors in those days that Ricky was not really a singer was because the fact that he didn't use vibrato. But the reason he became a hit is my personal theory. He sounded like the boy next door. He sounded approachable because prior to Rick, the famous record makers were people who you put up on a pedestal and thought, there's no way I could talk to this person. I mean, the stars of that day were considered to be on stage, and you'd go into the audience and you'd see them, and in no way would the average person think that they could actually attempt to go backstage and talk to him. But Ricky was the first one whom they felt, he's nice, he's the boy next door, we can walk up to him, we can talk to him. And I think that's why he was not as highly regarded by the music critics in his early days, because they weren't aware of how great he really was. After that, the more and more hit records began being made by voices with less vibrato. Until now, if a voice has a vibrato, you think, hey, this guy is square.
It's a fact, I believe, that Rick Nelson holds the record for having the most double-sided hit singles. In other words, both sides of that single went top 40. And I would also like to approach a little more of his unknown contributions to music. Were you on the Bright Lights Country?
Yes, I produced and arranged that whole album.
I'm interested to why and I apologize for not knowing that, but I don't have the albums. I am getting them. I'm interested to know why, at that time, Rick had decided and I believe that was the era that we were having psychedelic music, Beatles influence, of course, and all the rest of it. Why did Rick decide to go way off into an area that was not selling, not hot?
I have to guess at his reasons, and my guess is going to be that he always wanted to record country music. I mean, My Bucket's Got a Hole in It was a country tune that he recorded quite early in his career. He adored Elvis Presley's music. As I told you, he did Have I Told You Lately That I Love You, which was an Elvis hit, even though it was an old standard before Elvis had done it, but because Elvis had recorded it, he chose it. And we made sure in the first 2 or 3 records that the B-sides were always Elvis records, Elvis Presley covers. I would guess that by the time he did that Bright Lights country music album, that he felt that he had achieved enough control over his life that he could get what he wanted, so he asked for it. I think if he had felt he had the right to ask for it 2 years earlier, he would have asked for it 2 years earlier. Remember, Ricky was basically a very shy person, used to having major decisions made by his father when he was growing up, and Ricky very quietly began making his own major decisions, and so he chose that. I mean, I don't think he was even concerned with what the trend was. He knew what he wanted.
I have just sort of an unrelated question, but we're talking about Elvis Presley and Rick covering a lot of Elvis's tunes
in the early days. Yes.
One of the really finely arranged and produced records that Rick had was "Fools Rush In," which later showed up almost in the same arrangement in an Elvis Presley movie. Who covered who?
Okay, we originally covered someone other than Elvis. There was a pop recording, and I regret to say I forget who recorded it at that time, that of Fools Rush In at an up-tempo that Ricky had heard and asked me to listen to it, and I listened to it. I said, I thought it was great. And he says, let's record it. I said, okay. And I said, may we take it just slightly different, but it'll be the same feel. So I'm very, very proud of that, because prior to that time, Ricky would walk into the studio. He had a tendency to show up later than the session would start, but that always worked out well because it gave me an opportunity to teach the songs to the boys. When I said I was a ranger, the only guy in the group who read was the drummer Richie Frost and the various piano players. We had some would read to a degree, some wouldn't. For instance, Gene Garf was our original piano player. Leon Russell was our piano player who read fairly well but would rather learn by ear. A fellow named Ray Johnson was our piano player who read somewhat and could play better by ear. And so when I would start the sessions, I would pass out my arrangements, which were essentially chord sheets with 1 or 2 bass lines indicated. Joe Osborne didn't read much at that time. Later on, he became a very fine reader. And so I would then teach it to them, and they learned very quickly because, we had a nice relationship, the band and I. And then when Ricky would walk in, we were almost ready to record it, and Ricky would then come in and make a couple of suggestions, and then he'd sing a little bit so that James could feel how he's bouncing off Ricky's vocal. In the case of Fools Rush In, I played cowbell on it, just as I had also previously on Hello, Mary Lou. I'm very proud of having played cowbell on both of those. And Ricky hadn't shown up yet, so we went ahead and made a take. And Ricky walked in and said, surprisedly, that's fine. Let me sing a vocal over it.
Now, did Elvis later pick up that arrangement then?
I would presume so.
Yeah. I remember seeing that movie that he did it in, and I thought, my God, that's Rick's arrangement.
They liked each other very much, and they respected each other very much.
There's a story that Rick had revealed in an interview about you standing in the booth during the very early days and actually holding up cards with the chord changes on them.
No, I was not in the booth. I was in the studio. I was holding up chord changes, and the way that worked was that, as I said, James didn't read, but I developed a series of signals, and let's say that a song was in the key of F and had the chords F, C, B flat, which were normal. And then let's say at one point it had to go to a D flat chord. Well, on the back of a piece of music, I would write a big D flat, and just as we were about to approach that, I'd hold it up in the air. And James knew that we were, and the bass, both James and Joe would then know, okay, we're coming to the strange chord right now, and it's a D flat. Well, I'm very pleased that Ricky said that, and I guess it was funny at the time. But after a while, we reached the point where the boys memorized the chords, but they weren't always aware of when they were coming up. So I had a series of hand signals where if I went to the left, it was a subdominant chord. If I went to the right, it was a dominant chord. If I went in the middle, it was a tonic chord. And if it was a strange chord, I'd either go way to the left or way to the right. And they already knew the name of the strange chord, and it looked like I was blessing them when we were recording.
In the very early 70s or mid-70s, Rick left Decca.
Wait, do you have a copy of that interview with Ricky when he talked about it?
I do, sure.
I'd love to have a copy of it.
I will make sure you get it.
Thank you.
Let me just write that down, copy of interview. And Rick left Decca in the mid-70s. And that was earlier. Obviously, if he signed on with Decca in about 63, he would have had a contract till 83. Why did he leave?
I really don't know. I am aware of how he first signed with Decca. Ozzie and Lou Chudd. Lou Chudd owned Imperial Records, and Ozzie Nelson. They really didn't get along very well conversationally. However, they were both terrific businessmen, and if you want me to talk a little bit about that?
Sure.
Okay. I would go back and forth between Ozzie and Lou, not doing the, not for the negotiations. They had an attorney doing that. But I happened to be in Lou's office one time when he was talking to his own attorney and says, "What's the matter now?" He says, "I want to record Ricky." And the attorney says, "Well, Ozzie's this," and he's picking on that. And Lou said, "That sounds like picking lint to me," he says, and it's minor. He says, "Go ahead and okay all the latest changes Ozzie wants, and let's record the kid." He says, "Because I'm losing money every day." Lou felt that the kid was going to make money. And so very quickly they agreed on that. But then Ozzie, who was, what shall I say, how shall I phrase this, an extremely brilliant gentleman, college educated. Now Lou, in his own way, was and is brilliant. Lou is quite retired now, although I understand he owns quite a few radio stations. Lou's main claim to having achieved success was that he was a rough man. He could be very rough on the telephone. He would scream at people, and at times, not necessarily by using foul language. Yeah, he'd use a little foul language from time to time, but everybody does, to a degree, except Ozzie. I had never heard Ozzie use foul language, and one time Ozzie called me up on the phone on a Sunday, and it became a Sunday ritual, and he would put down this owner of the record company in using quite a few words so that you felt that it was a put down, and not one of those words was profanity. Ozzie had an amazing vocabulary. And then on Monday morning, we would say, "Did Ozzie call?" I'd say, "Yeah." Same thing, I'd say, "Yeah." I said, "You want to hear it?" He says, "No." But Ozzie recognized that Lou was a brilliant businessman and record company owner because Lou got those records distributed. He got records out on the street and at the radio stations faster than any other company in the world at the time. But after a while, I don't know why Ozzie didn't want Ricky to continue to be there. Perhaps Decca approached them with more money, but I can tell you the interesting story here, and of course you don't always have to print this on the air because this is going on tape, but I was also present at a conversation when I was in Lou's office, and when he got off the phone, he said, "Ozzie wants to take," oh no, I heard his end of the conversation. He says, "If you take him over if he doesn't re-sign with me, I'm going to send all of Ricky's royalties over to you in one check." And Ozzie said, "You can't do that." And Lou says, "Try me." Well, Ricky did sign with Decca Records, And Ozzie did take his total royalties and send them over in one check. You see, Ricky had the understanding with Lou Chudd at that time, due to Ozzie's negotiations, that he would, no matter how much he made, he would only receive $50,000 a year, and the rest would be kept in an account. Well, because of the high bracket that Ricky was getting to be in due to his TV show and his $50,000 a year royalties, the money that Lou sent over, and I forget exactly what it was, but it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000, immediately became half value because of taxes. Ozzie was very cognizant of taxes, and so was Lou Chudd. Lou was and is a brilliant businessman who knew about taxes and investments. Ozzie was a brilliant businessman who knew about taxes and investments. And the reason he said you can't send the check over in one lump sum is because he knew that if you sent a $500,000 check over, it would only be worth $250,000 to Rick. Well, that's right.
When Rick left Decca,
Yes.
did you go with him on any of the?
I didn't. By then, my own career was starting to bud quite well, and Ricky, who was used to taking a direction, really enjoyed working small combo stuff, and by then a lot of people felt that they knew how to direct or produce a small combo, and so he had various people produce him from that point on. And as I said, it was only when he was doing Rudy the Fifth that John Boylan and Ricky called me and said they'd like me to work on that a little. And I enjoyed that. But I felt that Ricky was doing his own career. And Ricky actually produced Garden Party, which, as you know, was one of his bigger hits. And by then he had learned quite a bit. Even while we were recording in the olden days, Ricky would say, well, why are you putting 3K on it? And we said, because of so-and-so. You know, we'd say, it brightens here and it does there and it makes and he said, let me hear what it does. And so in his own way, he began becoming an analytical producer. And until by the time he left Decca, he felt he could produce himself, but he was never a pushy person. And so those people were able to tell him what they wanted, who they wanted to produce him, and so forth. And even a year and a half ago, when we were working together, Ricky was still a very polite person. Bobby Neal would say on the guitar, Jimmie, I'm used to getting a certain amount of tape slap, or at that point, the digital delay added to my guitar when I take this kind of a solo. And I said, okay. And so we would go ahead and take it, and with Ricky singing, you know, and then he'd come in and we'd listen to playback, and he'd say, Jim, do you think maybe the tape slap's a little too much? And I said, yeah, it might be a little too much. Well, don't you think it's a little too much, Jimmie? By that time, I realized what he was trying to say is turn down the tape slap. But he wouldn't come right out and say it. He was just too polite.
Were you close with the family?
Close? No, I wouldn't say I was really close. Closer than many other people, of course. I did have... I visited the family at their house in Hollywood, and there were several occasions when I would go down. I was going to say I went down with my wife to the Laguna property, where they would go in the summertime during the hiatus from the TV show, and they would invite me, and I enjoyed that very much. And I enjoyed talking with Ozzie, who was willing to take time out and talk with me as if I was someone that he could perhaps teach something to. And so I came to think of him as, well, not necessarily a father figure, but as an uncle figure. And I would, for instance, when I was about to get married to Barbara, my wife, he had seen Barbara on a couple of occasions, because on one or two of those occasions that I was invited to, he told me I could bring my girlfriend, and so I did, and then I said, I'm going to marry Barbara, and so he said, Jimmie, let's talk. And he told me of the requirements of marriage and how it was not something that just happened, and I really appreciated what he told me. And then when we had our first child, who was now a great singer, named Scotty Haskell, by the way, she just played the Wink Martindale telethon and out there in Jackson, Tennessee. I don't know if you...
What is her name?
Scotty Haskell. She sang the theme song of called Give to the Children. And maybe check with some of your friends and...
Yeah. We're going to have to look. I wasn't even aware.
Oh, Well, Wink does that, I understand, every year. To get on with it, when I had my first child, Ozzie then, at this point, it was 4th of July celebration. We were out there at their house at Laguna, and Ozzie said some things. I wish I could remember exact wording, but he said, remember, you've got to baby the child until he's 2, be a pal until he's, I forget, he or she, because we were expecting, no, I guess she was already born. But whatever it is, he said, baby them till they're 2, be a pal until they're, I forgot what age he chose, and after that, you got to baby them till they're 2, be a dictator until they're about in their early teens, and after that, be a pal for the rest of the life. Which I thought, looking back on it in today's understanding of psychology, he was right.
When you visited the folks, I mean, the big question that everybody wants to know, were they really Ozzie and Harriet and Ricky and David, just like we saw?
The only difference is that Ozzie was not a buffoon at the house. He was just a nice guy. Mm-hmm. On the program, he played the part of a little bit of a buffoon or a little bit of a fool.
Sure, I think that's why it's so surprising to find that Ozzie was such an incredibly astute businessman.
Yes. He was just the most marvelous, well-rounded person anybody could imagine. And he was, whatever niceness people saw on the television show was absolutely that nice at home. Harriet is and was still, just that nice. Ozzie was that nice. David and Ricky were that nice, and they kidded around just the way they did on the show. Not as much as they did on the show, because they're really nice guys who certainly didn't do much kidding around in public.
How would you, Jim, characterize overall, and taking into account everything from 1956 till 1985, how would you characterize Rick Nelson's contribution to music?
It's hard to put it into words, so I'll just start saying whatever I can think of.
Sure, that'd be fine.
He always kept up integrity. He made records with integrity. They were good. They were clean. They felt good to listen to. A lot of them had a philosophy in the lyrics that either made you happy or made you think. And essentially, he liked to do songs that made you feel good. Mm-hmm. And I'd say for one thing, he made a lot of people feel good. For another, he showed the record industry that you didn't have to make out-of-tune, badly recorded records with extraneous noise in it in order to get a hit. Because a lot of people in those days felt loud drums is the only way to make a hit record. Loud guitar is the only way to make a hit record. And I actually had a couple of record company owners tell me that they wanted loud drums and loud guitar. And I said, you mind if I use a little bit of taste? They said, well, if the taste won't hurt the record. I mean, those weren't those exact words, but that was the indications I was getting from them. Ricky proved that you could record with taste and still have records that everybody liked and loved. And as far as what he personally contributed, I think just being a good person contributes to the world. There are enough. When you look at the total world, I believe that the percentage of bad people is quite small, but they exert quite an influence to the point of where you get to think that a whole area of people is bad, when in fact only 1 or 2 of those people are bad. Ricky was good, and I think that I'd like to think that he influenced a bunch of people to feel that you can enjoy life and still be good.
Well, here's one of them that he did. One theory that I have, and I've been more or less becoming more and more convinced of as I go on with all of the different interviews and research and such, is that one of the most significant things about Rick, and probably the biggest success, is that he, along with probably only the Beach Boys and Elvis Presley, were people that started in the 50s and continued on changing, growing, doing new things. They survived the British invasion and kept playing and growing with it, and by that I mean new music, changing some styles, and finding new directions and such. Not the Beach Boys so much, but they did continue to record and such. But I really feel that this is perhaps the biggest success of Rick Nelson is there was always a band, there was always records coming out, and it ties in with, and I'd like to get your comments on this. It ties in with the fact that Rick Nelson looks like a man who was the very least concerned with image in terms of, are my records selling? Am I playing the biggest stadiums? He just seemed to want to play. Could you address yourself to that?
Everything you just said is true. He just wanted to play. Yes, there were times when he was a little disturbed and a little hurt by not having the best audience that he would like to have. But you're absolutely right. When he would start playing, that's all he was concerned about. I saw that on his very first concert in Long Beach in public. He came out and the audience screamed. He did not know how to react to them, so all he did was stand there. And then when they stopped screaming, he started playing. By the way, he played guitar very well. People may not have been aware of it, but his sense of rhythm was outstanding. And that was another thing that contributed to the early sounds of the records, was his acoustic guitar matched the drums. Not so much that the drums matched his acoustic guitar, but that his acoustic guitar matched the drums because he had a great sense of rhythm, really a great sense of rhythm and tempo and timing. Anyway, to get back to your statement, yes, you are absolutely right. He was concerned more with just playing, just performing. Not so much performing by, I mean performing in front of public, but since it gave more of a reason to play, to be in public, he enjoyed playing. And he enjoyed recording because there again, he was playing.
Mm-hmm. Now, what sense do you have about, number one, I want to touch on, because you certainly know the music business inside and out, and I know you're a well-respected composer in your own right and such, and I know that you always have the eyes and the ears open. There was a movement in modern music, what they call country rock. It is also my theory that Rick Nelson, who has been accused of having bad timing in putting out country albums too soon, that it might have indeed been a cause and effect relationship, in that maybe Rick Nelson, being the major star that he was, had actually triggered a lot of the country rock movement. Can you tell me about what influence Rick might have had?
I have to tell you that that's an area I don't know too much about. I do know this, that record company executives through the years have always said, what can we sell? And when they see somebody selling in an area that they haven't touched, they say, maybe we ought to try it. Ricky, who was not concerned with whether it was country or whether it was rock or whether it was rockabilly or whether it was pop, as long as he could put it into his style, which I guess you would call country rock. He'd always been that way. He'd always loved it. In the early days, they termed it rockabilly when he first started playing, and which the British, by the way, copied when they started doing their wave of stuff. I believe that it's probably true that somebody out there said, hey, we can sell a few records if we do some crossover country rock records, because in the early days, country was country and it only sold in the country field, and rock was rock and it only sold in the country, in the rock field. And when they saw that country rock could cross over and sell in both fields, that meant, wow, hey, we can sell more records. I can understand a lot of record company executives deciding that, but that wasn't decided by the artist. That was usually decided by the record company executive.
I was also specifically, did you have a sense that Randy Meisner, who later was with the Eagles, and Alan Kemp and Pat Shanahan, who went with New Riders of the Purple Sage, did you feel that maybe that their work with the Stone Canyon Band on Rudy the Fifth and then on the concert album, did you feel that maybe that sent them in that direction?
Well, knowing a lot of players and musicians and artists, everything they do sets them up for what they finally do.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I'd have to say yes on that.
Okay.
But I can't say they had a sudden flash of insight and said, wow, this is because of working with Ricky Nelson, I'm going to go in this direction. It had to affect them. They had to enjoy working with Ricky, who appreciated good musicians. And Ricky always had musicians who were good and who did play well and who enjoyed playing. And so those people that you just mentioned, of course, would be affected by that and would be able to recognize that playing that kind of music could be fun and profitable at the same time.
Jim, I just want to ask you at this point, have you got about 15 more minutes?
I'm enjoying talking with you, and of course you're good for my ego. I didn't expect to talk this long, but sure.
Now you can comment on
well, yeah, we were just, as you were setting up the new tape, we were just talking about Carl Perkins, who had a great influence on Ricky's life. And I'm so pleased that you told me of the reaction of the two of them towards each other, in which you told me that they said it was a long time coming. Yes, when Ricky was brand new in the business, Carl was a great influence on his life. And so you asked me a question a little bit earlier. What influence do you think Ricky has? Well, since Carl had such a profound influence on Ricky, hopefully somewhere out in the world there's someone who has been influenced by Ricky.
What sense did you have about where Rick was headed musically?
As I said, I didn't think too much about it, but I'm thinking on it now. Ricky just loved to do the style of songs he was doing, and as I said, just prior to his passing, we were in the process of making a new album, using new songs that had never been heard before in his old style. Because luckily for him and for a lot of the people of that era, the style was coming back again. And so all he had to do was do his own style. And we fully expected that when he completed that album, as I said before, it's practically complete now, just waiting to be finished. We had the strong feeling, I had the strong feeling that when completed that, Ricky would have a resurgence of popularity in the record industry again, and that people would start buying his records again like mad, because prior to that time, his manager was really issuing or reissuing some of his older recordings that he had re-recorded again.
I'm going to ask you just a few, before I get into that, though, I did want to ask you one thing. You worked on Rudy the Fifth. Are you familiar with the song Gypsy Pilot?
Not really.
Okay.
I was working so much around the clock in those days that I did not take the time to always stop and smell the flowers, or to stop and listen to things that I was not working on. If I was not working on an album, I had to go and get on to my next project. And I was really working around the clock for a number of years, up until about a year and a half ago. And now I still work. I guess I work as much as the average man, but I worked tremendously around the clock in those days.
Mm-hmm.
I must admit ignorance, so tell me what you want to say about it.
Well, basically, the song was autobiographical, and
yes, I didn't remember the title, but I thought that it was very well done.
Okay. Want to get into just a few personal things about Rick in terms of when was the last time that you saw Rick?
Oh, about, let's see, it was late November. We were working in the studio, and I have a terrible memory for exact dates. We could look it up on the records of at that particular time. Let's see, we were working in two studios, Baby O and Conway. He and Bobby Neal came in to overdub a couple of things, and they were just taking off to go. I forget if they were taking off to go to that fateful tour that he never came back from. It was within a week of his passing, because, as I said, we were working on an album.
Mm-hmm.
And Ricky would come back into town off the road each time, and he'd say, Jimmie, I can't do it Wednesday or Tuesday, like you said, but maybe Wednesday would be okay, and then after that I have to go out of town again. So we'd squeeze in a day here and there and work on it.
Yeah,
again, I could look up the exact date if that's important.
No, it's not really, and I wanted your impressions about, in the last days that you saw Rick,
yes,
did he express to you how he felt the career was going and his hopes for his own personal life and where he wanted to go?
We all felt that he was moving up again. He knew that he was making a hit album, and that he was glad that we were making an album that sounded just like in the old days, with the kind of music that he liked, and with coming out with the same sounds and feelings as his early hits. And we just all naturally felt that this was going to be a hit album, and that Ricky's price for performing was going to go. I mean, he never said that, but that's my feeling. Ricky was just the same. It may sound strange to say this. He was exactly the same person he was at 17. The same nice person. He was a little more mature. He didn't. He spoke up a little bit more, but never overbearing. As I pointed out to you when I talked about his saying he wanted to take the tape reverb down on Bobby Neal, he was still the same polite person. And I just felt that he was going to be. That his star was rising again, and I think he felt the same way.
I'm going to ask you at this point, because I see my big reel is kind of running out. I'm going to ask you the question that I'm asking everybody that I interview. You knew and loved Rick, obviously,
yes,
for a long, long time. And I would like to know from your personal perspective, Jimmie Haskell's perspective, how would you like the world to remember Rick Nelson?
As the wonderful guy that he was, as the great performer and wonderful guy that he was. I don't know, it's hard to put it into words. I'm feeling a little sad.
Yeah, I know how you feel. At this point, I don't have any specific other questions to ask you, so we'll kind of wrap this up, because I know you're busy, and I would like, and you had indicated this, would it be possible if I come up with something else during the next week or so to get a hold of you again?
Yes. I've just been producing a young man named Adam Chester. We finish up this evening, then I take off for Mammoth Lakes, which is a little ski resort. It's just beautiful at this time of year, so I'll be up there. But when you call my phone again, there will always be somebody here who will know how to reach me, and just tell them that you're expecting my call, and they'll tell you how to reach me.
I can't express to you, and I never will be able to express to you, what it means for me to have you be part of this.
I appreciate your conscientiousness and the fact that you are actually being very good about this. And I like what you're doing.
I feel very privileged in being able to finally give Rick back something of what he gave to me. And we're going to, I think we're going to set the record straight. What I hope to do in the special is set the record straight on what Rick did musically, and also one little item about that plane crash and the rumors about drugs.
Let me tell you this, if I may. We're probably not on tape now, are we?
I got a cassette backup still going.
Okay, I'll tell you this. I was working with Rick very closely. We were in studio situations where the doors were closed. I have been in studio situations here on the West Coast where when the doors are closed and there's somebody out front screening people to get in, and we know that nobody can get into that room unless we've okayed it previously, that if anybody is going to indulge in any kind of substance that is not good, that's the time they'll do it because they feel safe. They're behind closed doors.
Mm-hmm.
Ricky never did anything. He never even lit up. He didn't do anything that people claimed that he was into. And that New Year's Eve, I got a call from a newspaper who said, we think Ricky was freebasing cocaine. I said, why would you think of a stupid thing like that? He said, because there was a fire. And I said, there has to be another reason for the fire than that. And later on, it was proven that there was a faulty heater on the plane. But those are the rumors that the newspaper men had to come up with because it was exciting. And why did they even come up with it? Because several years before, when Ricky was going through problems, personal problems, unfortunately had a lot of friends who led him in that direction. That turned out to be one direction, but it was stupid for them to, it was sad, it was wrong for them to try to create such a bad last image of such a good person.
Well, you know, I think through the years, and certainly with having so many of the big names prove at times to have problems and such like that, and it's always news now when anybody checks into the Betty Ford clinic or something, you hear a big thing about it. I think that they wanted to prove that hey, Rick Nelson isn't the nice guy that you see, because if he was the nice guy, he couldn't have any success because nice guys finish last, etc., etc. And when I met Rick, the very one time that I met him, what impressed me is, good Lord Almighty, this is Rick Nelson.
Yeah, he was clean.
He is absolutely.
By the time he got older, and as I said, several people introduced him to things, he wasn't above trying anything new at least once or twice, but he didn't stay with it.
And that was obvious from his appearance. You couldn't look like he did if you were an addict or even an abuser of anything. Yeah. And so
Rick was starting to get what shall I say, even healthy. He had a little tendency toward the a year before to start getting a little bit overweight. And when we did that video at Universal Amphitheater, and he saw us back, and he said, "Oh God, I got to lose weight." And so he started working out a little bit more, and he was taking care of himself. He was destined. His star was rising again. I don't know why. Yeah.
The last album that you did with him, is that coming out? Are you going to release that?
Which one? The one that I said is in the can?
Yeah, the one you did with the Jordanaires.
I don't know what Greg's going to do with that. Greg called me up. He says, Jimmy, what's it going to cost to finish the album? And I said, so I got together with Lee Miller, the engineer, and we talked about studio time, and we talked about the fact that we were going to have to spend a little more care on this in getting the sounds because it's the only existing master, and so, and then there was only one tune on the whole album where Rick's voice was so soft that the drum leakage was too loud. So I know a little bit about electronics, having worked, and I said, Lee, do you think it's possible for us to take the live drums on the drum track, delay it to match the time by the time it finally arrived at Rick's microphone, and maybe phase out the drums and just keep Rick's voice? He said that would be possible. It would take a lot of time experimenting. I said, fine, as long as you agree with me that it's possible. And so we figured out the amount of studio time to allow for this and for that, and I came back to Greg, and I said to Greg, I'm guessing about $45,000 to finish the album, doing it right, bringing the Jordanaires back, putting James Burton on, doing a careful remix, electronically reaching for Rick's voice when there's a little too much leakage from the drums and from the, essentially from the drums. And occasional lead guitar leaked in there because Bobby Neal did play a couple lead guitar solos while we were recording.